we ought to have a man on within the establishment, an officer responsible specifically for ideas about a new city. We got those ideas before the war, actually, in 1937. And what happened to us in 1940 added opportunities, you see. We got a cleaner sheet. And it led us to examine land use designation, industrial location and relocation. We've got a lot of small industries in the city centre, about 40 of them, incidentally.
Yes.
Coventry, Magneto and others. And we felt that they weren't suitable for city central planning in a way. We'd got to relocate them, and we bought land out at Candley and Alderman's Green, and we had our specified industrial sites for relocations. So we were doing a number of things made possible by the Blitz, but in relation to our own thinking about the future of Coventry in terms of its niceties and so on, the social satisfactions you were going to get, and it is rapidly increasing population, of course, presented problems. I mean, there were 20,000 people on the waiting list in 1980 and 1945.
Was there?
Yeah. Well, there was men who had gone to the war. I mean, who were sweethearting, who want to get married and so on.
Yeah.
And of course, there were no new building during the war. We had temporary accommodation in the government hostels. The National Hospital Association provided housing accommodation, and they bought wooden buildings up with a life of 5 years.
Yes.
So it lasted 35 years incidentally.
That's not the prefabs, is it? What they used
No,
to,
well, there were kind of prefabs in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. Because wasn't there a plan? Was it a Ford, the Ford plan that went? Was it Ennis Ford or something? Who brought in the early 30s, who did a plan based on sort of traffic flow around Coventry. Wasn't that where this idea of the ring road came from? Or do you know where that came from? That?
Well, I think it was born in the Ford area, Ennis Ford. And he was then the city engineer, and there were contentions in the Labour group and the policy advisory committee as to whether the city engineer should be the planning officer, and this is where some of the contention lied. And we just appointed our city architect in 1937, and we thought architects ought to be the planning officer. It raised contentions among some people who served in the city engineers department, and the elected persons who served the committee. And nonetheless, it carried, and Donald Gibson became the principal officer of planning, and both he and the city engineer presented schemes to the local authority, and it was debated in the city council as two separate schemes, one either competitive with the other, complementary, and the Gibson scheme was accepted, and it therefore put the city architect and top dog in regard to some of the decision making among members of the General Works Committee, as it was at that time. And some of us had unusual ideas about street lighting, for instance. I was keen on getting rid of what they called street furniture, lamp posts and so on, you see, really, fall over. and went for parapet lighting. I wanted parapet lighting on Broadgate buildings. We never got it because the city engineer dominated. You had parapet lighting on the Ringway. It's just been abandoned, by the way.
Is it?
Eh?
Is it? Oh, I didn't know that.
They've got floodlighting now on the Ringway,
Yeah.
Rudd Ringway. I was opposing that 40 years ago. I said to the city engineer, I said, the lights flick into your eyes at that level on the parapet.
Yeah.
And I say it's now accepted.
What were the ideas? Where did the idea for like the sort of the pedestrian precinct come from that Don Gibson had? I mean, where did his ideas come from? What was he influenced by, do you think?
Well, in my opinion, it's not altogether original because I've had the pleasure of travelling down the Dalmatian coast as a guest of the Yugoslav people, and Sarajevo in particular, because we're twinned with Sarajevo. And I'm an honorary citizen of Sarajevo, by the way, the only one in England. And I've seen in Dubrovnik and Budvar examples of the precinct idea. So it's safe to assume, I think, that perhaps Donald Gibson or others had been that way themselves and seen an example of pedestrian vehicle segregation. So, well, it wasn't peculiar to Coventry. It'd been copied. And they actually, in Yugoslavia, they actually copied parapet lighting incident. If you go to Trade Union Square in Belgrade, you can see parapet lighting we were recommending here, which we never applied. But when they delegations come in to study what Coventry was doing in the post-war years, took ideas away from us and made use of them.
So when the actual war came along, did that? I mean, and like the sort of awful bombing, particularly in November. I mean, how did that sort of change things very much, or was the plan very much as it was before? I mean, was the plan sort of Gibson's plan? Was that?
No, I think the fundamental basis of the plan was in accordance with Gibson's original conceptions. But we were required by the government to make a study of land use, and the report on the Civic Review Plan 1936. I'll show it in a minute or two. And it sets down there the land uses that the planning committee put upon plots of land, areas here and there. And we specified an area for central redevelopment in which there could be local authority possession of land and what we call a declaratory order area. Within that declaratory order area, the citizens were supreme. They were the landowners and going to enjoy, we hope, the equity of property development in the city centre. And we earmarked in the DOA 435 acres for comprehensive development. And the Treasury, under the guidance of Jim Callaghan, decided to cut it down to 278. So we didn't get as handsome a slice of the cherry, as you might say, for central area development in accordance with the original concept about it. And it's one of the most disappointing sessions of my life when we got this from Callaghan, who was a leading member of the Labour Party. Really, we thought that he'd be with it in terms of our ideology. But we kept 278, which the officers were saying, well, you've got plenty to be going on with you. That was the viewpoint. You've got land enough to be going on with. But it didn't take the more comprehensive look at the extent to which there ought to be sharing the equity. I've been to Hull at the invitation of former Lord Mayor of Hull. He served on the AMC Town Planning Committee with me. In fact, he was vice chairman to me in that committee. I was chairman of the AMC Town Planning Committee, and it afforded opportunities in that capacity to go and look around the world a bit. It took me to Örebro in Sweden to look at land use designation they were examining, and to Jerusalem, Palestine. The Jews were going back home at the Palestine Commission, and it was forcing problems upon them of a most unusual character. Not only housing, which was a big one, but language problems too. And we had able to have seen that close at hand. And then later on it took me to Tokyo, and that involved a flight over the North Pole to Anchorage, the first leg of the journey, and then on to Tokyo beyond. And Tokyo was examining the pressures of transportation, housing, and so on, much like we were doing. I suppose that had a lot to do with the use of the motor car. I mean, you see what Jimmy Savile says on the radio, it's the age of the train, it's not true. It's not the age of the train. No. It's the age of the motor car and aircraft, really. Yeah. And it's mischievous, in my view, to keep saying this. I mean, I don't know whether he gets paid for it. I suppose he does.
Yeah, because that getting back to the Gibson plan again, didn't they have? Wasn't there some exhibitions, like public exhibitions?
There was an exhibition in the drill hall. Yeah. Old drill hall, which is pulled down now, by the way.
Was it?
Oh yeah. And this was an exercise in what we call broadly public participation. And it was one of my joys in life to go round to meetings, all kinds of meetings. People, the women's group, Court Women's Guild, trade union branches, ward party organisations, or anybody that were going to be affected, and they all were going to be affected somehow or other. I've got a note down here as the city architect conceived civic design as frozen music.
Frozen music, that's a good one. Who's that? Was that Don Gibson who was saying?
That's right, yeah. Well, I quote it. It's one of my notes, for when I've been talking at different times, or depending on who I was talking to. History of dust heap, a tale told by an idiot signifying nothing. History is a dust heap, a tale told by an idiot signifying nothing.
Do you think there was that idea that somehow that you did want to sort of almost like obliterate history to a certain extent and like build something completely like a revolutionary sort of development, and want something completely new? Because you do get that feeling, don't you, in the precinct that it's just been built, that it's almost come from nothing, literally like kind of a phoenix. Yeah, well, I really hate that phrase phoenix, really, because it's sort of, I don't know, it doesn't give you a complete idea of what actually happened, does it?
Not necessarily, except unless you study Walter Rich's contribution onto the bridge. That sculptural work, that's man in search of a philosophy. Did you know that?
No.
Well, if you study that, you'll see there's a hand hand and a bone. This is the early beginnings of Garden of Eden, I suppose, sort of concept. And then it moves up from the animal stage, you see, to higher areas of responsibility. And there's and anyway, his brain's exposed, you see. It's in a round ring.
Yeah.
And he's reaching out then for the arts and music and so on. And then, as I say, you look at the other end of the bridge. They've got a horse there. Now, a horse is one of the first animals or beasts that man control for his own purpose, really. That goes back in 1,000 years in history. You read all about the Arabs and everybody else. The Indian, they all had horses, you know. And this man's restraining this horse and bringing him, you know, into behaviour patterns he wants for himself. And you see there in that stonework too, a workman in the city engineer's department, stoneworker. You see the child in the womb, incidentally, as well.
Whereabouts is that?
This is on the upper precinct. It's in that statutory work, you know, where the fountains are.
Oh, I know. Oh, that's it. That is it. Oh.
That's it. Well, that's man in search of philosophy, really.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't realise that.
If you're looking up to Broadgate, on the right-hand side of the beginning, it's at the hand of the bone.
Yeah.
I ought to take you around sometime.
Yes, I'd love that. That'd be really interesting. Because there's so many features, like, I mean, look, people walk past like that sort of thing every day, and they probably don't realise the sort of the ideas that were behind it in the first place.
Not at all. They don't at all.
No.
They don't know it at all.
No.
There was a plaque up there at one time, but it got swiped, I think, for some reason or other. Somebody vandal had a go at it, and they never replaced it. But they certainly ought to put the story on about it. But you see, I had ideas myself about the water feature. You see, it's a static one up where it is now under the bridge. And I wanted a running stream there, incidentally.
Yeah.
And I thought we might have put a few trout in, you see. I've got fishing instincts and so on. But you've got opposition from the business interests. Oh, we don't want a flowing stream. We want people in our shops spending their money, you see. Right? They go down, they're looking for the tiddlers, and, you know. But I wanted to see the water pushed down to the Sherwell.
Yeah.
Sherborne.
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 Yeah.
And it just flows underneath the precinct, you know, and recycling that water from the top of the precinct back again, and give a flowing stream. So I say the business people didn't want it.
Yeah, because it wasn't the Chamber of Commerce. I sort of read in here, or was it Ken Richardson saying that the Chamber of Commerce were actually against the plan to start off with, the precinct plan.
But they were to start with,
because it they thought it would jeopardise the sort of freehold nature status of the sort of centre or something.
They were against it all through the Donald Gibson regime as architect and planning officer. And it was Arthur Ling who virtually, in the end, persuaded the Chamber of Commerce that it was the proper thing to do in the light of modern circumstances. But you see, all that pattern has changed now because of out-of-town shopping, and this, to my mind, has been a tragedy from you. You got that, where you get these Sunday markets now and then. And you've got Sainsbury right up in Canley Way now. That's a devolution, really, of a kind which, to my mind, has been a mistake. The Americans have found this out. I mean, the towns in America have deteriorated, consequent upon out-of-town shopping. And whilst it may have some virtue, I think that, by and large, it's tends to devitalise the city centre, and that's what happened here. But this happened in the period of the West Midlands County Council, metropolitan idea. And we just inherited that, and whether the clock can be turned back on, it, haven't know.
Because was there any other sort of voices of dissent about the plan, like apart from Chamber of Commerce? I mean, what sort of reaction was gauged from the like the public exhibitions? Were people generally enthusiastic? Or was it?
Well, one got the impression that having seen what was in the mind of the architect, they were in symbolic form. Now go around this thing, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
As you look at the officers, they stage managed, and they put the various symbols in, of development. And we got prominent people. I'm trying to think of the name of the bloke who came to open it, but it ran for a week in the drill hall, and as I say, there were devolved discussions at various stages, and we'd made it a matter of principle that any organisation, however modest they may be, had an entitlement to come and talk face to face with the Planning and Redevelopment Committee. And we brought in working men's clubs, for instance, boys brigade organisations. They'd been displaced in the Blitz, you see. They probably had money for rebuilding, and they were scratching around for civic help in one kind or another. And of course the Midland Brewers. It means that the Midland Brewers were first in the queue on this.
This exhibition, that was the one at the end, towards the end of the war. At the end
No, this one. That's one in the war.
That was the future Coventry or something.
One. But as I say, we had a pattern of behaviour which kept it all wide open, and the Midland Brewers were the first in, and it rather shook me to find that to be the sort of priority we ought to be satisfying, the booze trade. I'm teetotaler myself, I may be a bit biased on this, but funnily enough, the cathedral were the last in the queue. And only then, because they made representations, the Cathedral Reconstruction Committee made representations over to the Ministry of Works in London about our schemes. And the Ministry made a decision over our heads to give the Cathedral a starting date, a 5-year scheme.
Because didn't the Labour Council at the time didn't want to make it that much of a priority, did they? They didn't want to give it a 10-year wait or something.
Well, you see, we thought in the Labour Party there was higher priority than the cathedral. I mean, you got 20,000 people waiting for houses.
Yes, yeah.
And that's the sort of thinking we were doing there.
Yes.
These are the basic things we've got to do to start with.
Yes.
You can think about the cathedral, later on. It's still a lot of the churches got smashed up. I mean, this one across the road is a relocation, you see. But the Ministry of Works, as I say, went over our heads on this. And based on this open door principle, I invited myself, as chairman of the planning committee, cathedral people to come in and talk about this. And they did, as a matter of fact. And we had the people who were concerned at the time face to face in front of the planning committee to put their views, and it obliged us to set aside our ideas about priorities on this particular case. Was it cathedrals or houses? Chapels before houses, and we were inclined to go for the housing. I suppose very much in line with Labour Party's thinking, really.
Because that whole period is now, when some people refer to it as like the golden age of the Labour Party, don't they? That sort of period, that sort of administration immediately after the war, because there was that kind of, I suppose there was that kind of enthusiasm for sort of rebuilding the country and the society. And I mean, what do you think, looking back at it now? Do you think? I mean, how do you see the successes of the Labour Party then as regards Coventry? I mean, do you think it merits that description? I mean, because a lot of people now, I don't know. I mean, I talked to some people in the Labour Party, and they sort of they rather disillusioned with Neil Kinnock and that sort of thing. I mean, do you think that sort of thing's merited, or do you think, as you say, that Labour Party's just changed with the times?
Well, I think it fitted into the possibilities, the capabilities at that time. I think one's got to remember that Coventry and what it did in connection with the war effort was of vital interest to the prosecution of the war. I mean, although we had our invasion committee, we never were invaded. And it was only due to the fact that Hitler chose to go east in 1941 and tackle the Russians. It saved on. We no more bombed on Coventry after 1941. And it had to do with the fact that Hitler got a job on his hands with the Russians.
Wasn't that sort of prompted the link up with Volgograd, or what is now Volgograd?
Well, it was Stalingrad then. We linked with Stalingrad then. And our first twin, by the way. And I had a finger in the pie and all that.
Did you?
Oh, yeah. We got Madame Maisky to come up. She was the wife of the ambassador in Russia. She came and talked to our women's guild women. The Women's Guild were very active. Sid Singer's wife, Sid Singer was chairman of the party. His wife was very active in the co-op. And Sid Singer was a member of the management committee of the co-op. And they were a live force in co-op circles. And there is a famous tablecloth that hangs in the War Museum in Volgograd now. It's got the signatures of Labour women, co-op women. My wife's got her signature on it, incidentally. I've seen it hanging in the War Museum in Volgograd.
That's right.
So they retained this for sentimental and other reasons, I suppose, wartime connection with links with Coventry. But now, with regard to these priorities, as I say, you've got to look at the fact that Coventry was unique in its contributions to the war effort. For instance, at the Albis, they were making the supercharger for the Merlin engine. And they were out of action at the Albis. They got no power supplied at all. And Billy Roots, Lord Roots, who came to be, had the job of dealing with industrial recovery. And he had to tee up with me because I was chairman of the gas committee at the time, municipal gas committee. And I said to him, what's your priority? First question. We've got to get the Albis going here. First priority. Well, so we've got to get gas from what the gas holder up Holyhead Road here to the works. And we've got to get it done quickly. I said, have you ever thought about using flanged pipes instead of digging the hole in a trench and burying them? He said, well, that's not an idea. So we got flanged pipes. On my suggestion, I'm an engineer, by the way, which lined the road from the gas work right up to Holyhead Road, right to the Albis. As a matter of fact, this job had been done at Baker Perkins in Peterborough, and they weren't making a job of it. It was a tribute to the Coventry's ability on high precision engineering and so on. And this is a factor that nobody ought to forget, seems to me. despite the fact we got a job of rebuilding Coventry, we had got to play our part in the war effort as well, which was considerable and vital in my opinion. You see, the shadow factories were sited here.
There was quite a lot of them, wasn't there? There was quite a lot of shadow factories around Coventry.
Well, I think there were 6 altogether. And there were number 1s and number 2s, you know, all in reserve in case the others got in, all on the perimeter of the city. Well, that presented problems for me and the gas, chairman of gas, because I've got to get gas out over miles of the area, right to these factories, with no consumption en route. Not like houses, you see, really. And the government were a bit tardy about financing all this, but nonetheless we had to do it as part of our contribution to the war effort. And having regard, I say, to the quality of engineering that was required in connection with war weapons and so on, we had to toe the line. And you know, of course, that Frank Whittle was born here.
Yes.
Well, he's typical, you see, of the type of people who are on the ground here, who are muscling in and out, you know, in these situations. His dad was at Alfred Herbert's, of course. And I knew Frank Whittle because I made him a member of the Labour Party, incidentally.
Did you?
Ah.
That's interesting.
Well, I don't know you that way now. But he knocked at my door in the Labour Party office, 28 Much Park Street, which has now been liquidated. One day, I didn't know him, of course, and he said, I've got connections here. I didn't know him from you know, any other chap in the street. And they began to talk, and he was then flying off as a Whittle. And he said, I've got a squad of lads on here, you know, Shefton I think it was, who are interested in the party. Can you give me some literature? So my job was to put a pound on the table, and I said, well, pick what you like from the office to take to your lads. And I'd accept a pound and look at the other on propaganda. So there were connections of that sort, and I think he epitomised the type of people, really, around and about, which was essential to the practice of engineering, which was part of the war.
Did you know anything about his work on the jet engine then?
Well, he was no, he didn't, not at that particular time. Of course, he struggled with that, as you know, largely because of metal fatigue. And there is a Bentley engine case, or was, in the Transport Museum, and it's not there now for some reason or other. But there was a live example, you know, a physical example of what metal fatigue meant in terms of practice. And I said, why the hell are you taking this away? Because it spells Coventry. They'd lent it to somebody else on show. And I don't think we've got it back yet. But you see, Frank was struggling with all sorts of problems, really, not just the technique of the jet engine, which, as you know, does away with friction services. That in itself was fundamental.
But he had a lack of money as well. There wasn't much money being put
Well,
into
that's
the project,
right. Well, he went to Stafford Cripps, you see, and Stafford Cripps found him some. But it's out of the exchequer at the time, but it wasn't enough to satisfy the requirements of Whittle. But nonetheless, he got going, and in the end, I think that we got a jet engine. He now lives in America, as you probably know.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He's in America now. I don't know what firm he's with, but he came to Coventry about 9 months ago, and I got in telephone conversation with him, and he said, I'm sorry, I can't come and see you, I've got to go back tonight. But we took up quite an interesting acquaintance with him, mainly on the basis of his Labour Party ticket.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because you're talking about because Alfred Herbert, you mentioned earlier on.
Yeah.
He I was sort of reading that he had something to do with what he donated was it the £100,000 for the Herbert Art Gallery or something?
That's right, he did, yeah. It was only half enough.
Yeah, but yes, I heard that there was sort of various sort of conditions that he sort of attached to it.
Well, the conditions were that his brother should be the architect responsible for building it. He was based on Leicester, as a matter of fact. Those conditions were attached to the £100,000 gift. But even then, the amount of money he was putting in didn't represent the adequate requirements. And we sent a delegation to the Arts Council in London. I was one of the delegation, actually, to argue the case for government support on all this. But in the end, we found 100,000 out of local finances. We married up Salford Herbert's 100,000 from the local funds.
There's where the sort of public loos are up near the Herbert Art Gallery. There's that with a flat roof. It seems to have a flat roof. It seems to be built in a kind of almost like. I can't remember what road is it over the other side.
It's between the council house and the museum.
Yeah, there's that building between the council house and the Herbert Art Gallery Museum.
Right.
That white building.
That's the basis of an extension of the library, originally.
Ah.
It's a toilet now.
Yeah.
And of course it's got the that old building where they're on the courts at the moment. It's got a name to it, but that belonged to the Freeman's Guild. And they got a vested interest in this, and they fought to retain this building. And they made representations to the planning committee that we should, at all risks, keep this going. And of course, they now got them planted up Warwick Road, now as an alternative to that. And nonetheless, the site needs attention, and there ought to be a major operation, much as they're doing with Belgrade Square at present time. I think it's going to come, and things are moving correctly in that direction, in my view.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's because the new future developments seem quite exciting as well, don't they? Because this new is it? What's the name of the new store that's going to be put up in Smithford Way along there?
Yeah.
Do you know much about that? Because that's going to change the shape of the sort of precinct again, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, it changed the elevations completely. Yeah. But no, this is before it's after my time, actually. See, I can only play the part of an onlooker now, except a prod, now and then, on an issue I feel as a citizen ought to have attention.
Yes.
I mean, there are interests. I mean, out-of-town shopping is a case in point. I've always been against that, for the sake of Coventry's vitality. Other instances where I think the virtues of Coventry stand out. I mean, its background in local democracy, for instance, and the need for consultation at grassroots level all the time. This is a quote from "Towns are made by human hands," you see, really. This is part of that theme. And I think it must go on, basically, along those lines, if it's going to give a sense of belonging to what's going on. That's important, seems to me. You may not ring bells every time, but if you're trending in the right direction, and there's always a chance of recovery or reassertion of an idea that's probably missed out at some stage. it can surge up again and probably take a different shape, but nonetheless is complementary to the grand design. And this is what you've got to keep on your mind all the time. The feasibility of the idealism that's got to go in with it. And if you fall short of that, well, that's unfortunate, but
Mm.
nonetheless, your aims and purpose seems to be calculated to find decent ends.
Yeah, because certainly the idealism of recent years has taken a real hammer blow under the Tories, hasn't it? I mean, because Coventry was like the boom town, wasn't it? In the sort of late 50s and early 60s, wasn't it?
Well, I think there again, what failure of perhaps the Labour Party not to hit the headlines, not to be true to itself, and to fulfil its vision of a new sort of society, which seems to be the popular pattern in many parts of the world just now. I mean, you've got mighty changes in the Philippines, comparatively recently. That's in a turmoil again. Well, Nicaragua, case in point. I think the African situation again indicates that there is revolutionary change required if the iniquities and inequalities of apartheid are going to be continued. But it's all part of the boil and ferment, seems to me, that's going on in the world at the moment. And in my view, it can only have one end in view, that's to enrich life for the ordinary person in society. And I think that goes on into eternity, seems to me. You make your contribution, you chip in what you know, I mean, and live as long as you can. And
yeah. Because the people like, you mentioned earlier on, like Bill Halliwell, and the sort of, I don't quite know what sort of Communist Party like policies are today, but they had this, they had their sort of view of socialism was more of the kind of the revolutionary road, wasn't it? That like the Labour Party didn't really share that. Was it more a difference of like how to get there rather than where you ended up, sort of thing?
I think it had to do with an assessment of English characteristics, really. I mean, we are slow movers, really. I think we want to know what, if one step leads satisfactory to another step in the right direction. We're more calculating and not quite so adventurous as some. I think it's characteristic of the British personality. But no, I'm disappointed personally that we've not moved faster, we've not seized our opportunities. Well, I spent some time as chairman of the finance committee in here, 14 years, either chairman or vice chairman, and I looked at financing operations, burdens on the taxpayer and the ratepayer, and all of them. Can he afford it? Is our economy of the kind that it's reasonable to expect? And of course, with the rising millions of unemployed, I mean 3 million now, your economy is not on a very sound foundation. All those people ought to be earning and learning. And I sometimes quote that when you go to work to earn the money, to buy the food to give us strength to go to work, to earn the money to buy the food to give us
So it just
strength to
becomes a
go to
vicious
work.
circle, doesn't it?
It's a vicious circle.
Yeah.
And I think we're creeping out of that a bit, and I think the Japanese example of profit sharing and what's going on in a small way locally at the Jagger again are examples of what could be national trends. And
Do you think that's a good? Do you think that's a healthy trend?
I think so. Along it couldn't make a person selfish, but I think you've got to cope with that selfishness, if you like. But you see, if the person is involved right to the very nth degree of what's going on in the undertaking, if it's part of the economy, he wants to satisfy a niche somewhere in the pattern of evolution, and if profit sharing doesn't brighten his ideal, I think it could lead in a way to more satisfaction. So you've got elements of it now in some parts of industry. Before I came in, I never worked on piecework or any system of payment by results. I was just day work man. And then when I came to Coventry, I was earning 3 times as much, doing the same amount of work, if you like. But it was all part and parcel of the evolutionary pattern of society. And I think the Japanese are showing us what is feasible now. And again, once more, you turn back to the basics of all this. Where do you start? You start in the school days. And we're missing out on this. I mean, reports now that mathematics teachers are in short supply. There's less now than there were some time ago. And this had been my bone of contention for years, since I came off the council and got into school governorships. Both my wife and I are school governors. I'm chairman of Camden, and we compare notes. I read her paper, she reads mine, and if I have ideas, you might steam this up. I mean, at the moment, I'm concerned with peace studies in school. And I've been raking the earth a bit to find out examples of where it's been tried out.
Because the Tories really don't like that sort of thing at all. They think it's sort of lefty subversive sort
Well,
of...
even I find
spreading
it now, even in religious groups, they think that religious education is going to be circumvented if you go for the peace idea, you see, the peace studies. But I wrote to Paris quite recently, the United Towns organisation, or information on something, and got the footnote, do you know anything about peace studies in schools? And I got an interesting letter almost within 3 days from Paris, from the United Towns people, to say that in Nottinghamshire County they have peace studies already. And I've got a letter only this morning from the education chairman, Jeff White, who I wrote to about this. I said, this is up your line of country. And he's taken it to the officers, and the officers bluff a bit. And they put in reasons why, and the system as it is satisfactory in a sense. But on the Coventry Committee of International Standing, we've got a parson there, and when you talk about it, he is afraid that it's going to impair religious education. But it ought to be part of religious education, really. Or part of education, if you like. You can put any labels on it. But I think all the kids in school ought to know that war's a bit of an enemy to their future anyway. And this is part of the process one's involved in. You get talking to sixth formers.
Yes.
And the work goes on.
Because there's been a bit of a fuss recently over the Future Choices paper, wasn't
Yeah,
there?
that's right. Well, this is the challenge at the moment, really, isn't it? But whether they're looking deep enough at this, again, I don't know. But I'm concerned particularly with the curricula, really, because I know that in other parts of the world they're in front of us. And as a matter of fact, one of our charities, the Spencer Travelling Fund trustees, had before them a request from the head of the computer department, Lancaster Polytechnic, some 2 or 3 years ago. He'd been in touch with a Japanese professor who gave him an invitation to go to Japan for 3 months in order to have a look at their teaching techniques and the subject matter they were handling. A chap named Stevens. When he came back, he produced a report. And in the report, he said that Japan is 10 years in advance of Britain in the teaching of maths and in the exercise of new scientific methodology, the computerization, and so on. And we're losing out in that direction.
I mean, do you often look towards Japan as a kind of a model, because they're very much not a sort of a socialist society, is it really?
Well, no, they've voted anti-socialist just now, according to today's news.
Have they?
Yeah. No, I thought in terms of engineering, scientific, technological practices, they were onto something. We smelt a bit when I was in Japan. We smelt a bit of this. But having had this professor from Lancaster Polytechnic on the ground for some time, I'm sure that there are examples in Japan we might make use of, really, not necessarily swallowing all that they do. It's a matter, I think, of involvement and being part of the process. I think this is typically Coventry in a way. I mean, our attempt to get people involved as individuals in the street, you know. And
well, I mean, what sort of advice would you give somebody like me who's just joining the Labour Party, and in light of all your years of experience? I mean, because I'd quite like to become an active member. I mean, are there any sort of guidelines for getting your ideas across?
You've got to be identified at the roots of the thing to start with. This means membership of either constituency party, a delegate of some sort. I happen to be a delegate from my own trade union branch. The branch don't meet very often now, and it's a bit of a false situation I'm in. I like to report back to the members in the branch. But you see, the initiatives now in regard to labour behaviour patterns and modifications, improvements, lie very largely with the shop steward. And the trade union movement officially are not harnessing that channel of information and practice. It seems to me has to replace what used to happen in the branch. It's a geographical, it's industrial versus geographical thing, you see. And of course this is what's happening all over the world where the changes are taking place. This is a nice distinction between a parliamentary democracy and a people's democracy. This is what people criticise the Soviet Union about, totalitarianism about it. Well, that's understandable up to a point, but if they look deep enough, they'll find that the man on the factory floor in the Soviet Union is being consulted quite a lot. He's part of the democratic process. It is, in fact, industrial democracy. And the sort of thing that the Bullock Report tried to implement or publicise. And my own union, I'm a member of the Engineers Union. I'm already ASC, incidentally, Amalgamated Society of Engineers. my own union threw it out the window, the Bullock report. I think it was a damn shame, a huge mistake. They ought to pursue the line, seems to me, of study on it, rather than chucking it out. I mean, try it out. Wijgerden's trying it out now. And I think with some success. I mean, if Hagen's to be believed, he's turned the tide, really. And the old organisation has been put aside. He's got a new spirit into the thing. And that's what matters, seems to me. And it all has to do with a sense of belonging to it.
What do you think of the new style unionism represented by people like Eric Hammond and EPTU? I mean, because there's all been that lot of fuss about EPTU at Wapping, hasn't there, and all that. I mean, how do you sort of see that kind of new style of it's almost like management unionism?
Well, I don't like to see anybody hopping out of any situation, whether it be the home level, the branch, trade union branch level, a ward party level, constituency level, or even at executive level. You've got Tony Benn and Effa walking out of party meetings. To me, that's a retreat from reality, really. They ought to stay there and fight. I mean, as I say, I've been a member of Labour Party in 1913, at 70-odd years. And I've thought it my duty to stay there, despite of defeat sometimes, disappointments. That my job is to convert from the inside, really, and tolerate the differences. Believe me, it can only be short-lived in a way, whatever life may be, whatever length of life may be. And you can think of that in hundreds of years, if you like. But
You're running out of tape soon, I think. So we're going to do some macros of that stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. Well, I think we'll finish there anyway. I mean, what would you, if Labour wins the next general election, what would be any advice that you'd give to Neil Kinnock coming into number 10? Is there anything you'd like to see them set about quickly?
Well, I think that they've got to fit in with what they're trying to do on reform of finance, seems to me. The use of finance. They've got a national investment trust of some sort. That's the big idea. It isn't nationalisation of the banking system, but still part of the system. And it will require, seems to me, if it's going to be successful, for the wholehearted cooperation of trade unions, since they are an integral part of the Labour Party, in fact, formed the Labour Party. The trade union did to start with, as a political wing. And I would think that they've got to look at finance, and I don't know the detail of this, although the Trade Union Congress have produced a report, which I have on my file, by the way. I asked for it. I asked for that. I don't know, member of the Finance Committee. I was interested in the theory of all this. And, you know, I find now that more than 50% of the money's investment now are derived from pensions fund. Pensions fund. What I've been contributing over years. I get a monthly allocation now on my superannuation, like it is. It's a godsend for me to have this, but when I realise that the accumulated sums that there are now being invested, which the joys and satisfaction ought to come back to the pensioners, and it's not doing that, to my mind. I think the Labour Party's got a challenge of a kind in that direction. And I think there is an attempt on the part of Roy Hattersley's side to find a vehicle, an instrument, or a technique, or a mode, or a political, economic setup which would take care of that side of the business
Mm.
more than has been said. You see, London Money Market is a casino, it's a gambling society.
Mm.
And this is what I hate. I'm not a gambler. I've always tried to be tidy, if you like. I don't smoke now. I don't drink
Mm.
alcoholic liquor only on state occasions.
Mm.
I don't go with strange women.
Yeah. Anyway, that's great. I think we'll finish there actually.